Action Marin. And I'm surrounded by a group of other leaders from Bay Area Coalition. So thank you to all of them for helping with the presentation tonight. That's who you see on your front page of your screen. I am so excited to welcome this nationwide group of hundreds, over 800 probably by the time it turns 531. Activists, grassroots leaders, organizers, representing groups from at least 20 states, with, unsurprisingly, a majority of women. And in our midst tonight, we have a certain professor from Maine who we will hear from in a few minutes. And like many in this room, I think I share this, Heather Cox Richardson is the one who helps me find clarity and perspective when the chaos and horror we are experiencing leaves me spinning. And in a few minutes, Heather will be interviewed by Bay Area radio and TV veteran and activist Celeste Perry. So next slide, please. So our group, the Bay Area Coalition, is comprised of over 30 Bay Area grassroots groups whose logos you see now on your screen. We came together because we wanted to be as effective as possible, because we have a lot of Bay Area volunteers, thousands of them, that we wanted to harness their power. For those of you who don't know, we are based in the San Francisco Bay Area, and San Francisco is very, very proud to be represented in Congress by our speaker, Nikki Haley. Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi often tells us, don't agonize, organize. And that's what we're going to focus on today, taking action. We have a little over 9 months to save our democracy, and we are ready to fight like hell. So next slide, please. And I'm just going to keep welcoming people coming into our meeting, the 2024 kickoff of the Bay Area Coalition with special guest Heather Cox Richardson. So our targets for the Bay Area Coalition, I just want to talk about taking action now, and I'll bring your attention before I do to the QR code you're going to see in the upper right side. It's going to appear on all our slides going forward, and that QR code links to the ways you can take action with the Bay Area Coalition. So please scan it with your cell phone, your mobile device, and you will also find our registration link tree in chat. So chat is open, but again, it's only open for the hosts to post information to help you get started taking action. And it's also going to include our guest speakers, a link to buy our guest speaker's newest book. You'll see that in chat as well. And that is a great way to support her and keep her writing those letters. So our Bay Area Coalition's strategic focus is on California and our neighboring swing states. And our neighboring swing states, Arizona and Nevada. So we can combine canvassing and voter registration drives with other tools. We're also a DNC hub, so we'll be phone banking for the Biden-Harris campaign and the coordinated campaigns in the United States. The tools we're using, phone banking, voter registration, and canvassing, along with volunteer training. We partner with our coalition to offer postcards and letter writing. We also help with critical races like the special election that's now underway in New York 3, my home district, to replace George Santos, and for other issues like allowing the Ohio constitutional amendment to pass. And you'll see that now on slide 4, our voter actions matter. We see results when we work together to get our voters to vote. In 2023, many of us activists and grassroots groups worked to help Wisconsin Supreme Court Justice Janet Protasiewicz. That's great. Instead of flubbing her last name, I couldn't pronounce Janet, to help her win the deciding seat to give progressives the majority on their court. We also helped Ohio to pass the constitutional amendment to protect access to reproductive health care. We also worked to retake full control of the Virginia state legislature after 2 years of divided power. And that win blocked the MAGA Republican trifecta and stopped Governor Youngkin from passing an abortion ban. all of those wins prevented MAGA Republican state legislatures from passing abortion bans. And all of those happened in 2023. As Simon Rosenberg says, we Democrats have a lot to be proud of, and I'd much rather be us than the other guy. And right now, we're phone banking to New York Congressional District 3, George Santos' seat, to help elect Democrat Tom Suozzi to give us a leg up in retaking the House. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry. Sorry, I was wrong. Back up, please. I was wrong. Thanks, Leanne. So again, our voter actions matter. We see results when we work to get our voters to vote. And these are some of the successes we had. But we also, in California, our own home state, we worked closely with the California Democratic Party because we know that the road to retaking the House majority runs through California. So we've been working through last year and this year in California's Central Valley in 2 critical congressional districts we shouldn't have lost in 2022 and that we need to flip in 2024, California 22 and California 13. And in those districts, we've already registered 2,000 new voters, knocked on 3,600 doors, and had 900 voter conversations. And we've also, through our phone banking, called 8,500 phone banks dials, also called 8,500 voters, and had 200 voter conversations. Every voter counts. Every vote counts. So please join us. Scan that QR code I mentioned earlier on the screen up in the right-hand side with your mobile device to register for our events. You can also find our registration link tree in chat. We're still welcoming new people into the room, and I see that we're almost at 925 people in the room. So thank you very much for joining us tonight. It's a great, great example of the energy we have in the grassroots to take back our country and to make sure that we preserve our democracy. So in the next slide, please. The Bay Area Coalition also features a speaker series that brings speakers like tonight's speaker, Heather Cox Richardson, so that we can be inspired and motivated and keep going. And we have 9 months, as I said, to go until Election Day. So on February 12th, we're going to welcome Anderson Clayton. She is the chair of the North Carolina Democratic Party and the youngest Democratic chair in the country. She's an amazing speaker. And please go ahead and sign up in the link in chat. You'll see her speaker event on the link tree. Please sign up for that. And on March 21st, we're going to be hosting training in the LGBTQ+ cultural awareness and communications with the author and educator Jana Barkin. And we also offer training in voter communication and the basics of canvassing, phone banking, all to get you going. All our phone banks and canvases also feature experienced coaches who will guide you, train you, provide you with all the background you need to talk with and listen to voters. And now we're going to go to the next slide. So again, this is that link tree I've been talking about. Just take a photo of this QR code and register for all our Bay Area Coalition actions. You can start taking action tomorrow. We are hosting a phone bank to New York Congressional District 3, which I spoke about earlier, to replace George Santos in Congress. And it's at 2:30 Pacific time. You'll find that registration link tree also in chat. So at this point, I'm going to, next slide, please. I'm going to welcome Professor Heather Cox Richardson. She's the author of her newest book, Democracy Awakening. And you'll see a link in chat so that you can purchase her book and send her up to the bestseller #1. And also with all the fans here, Heather needs no introduction. But I would like to also introduce Celeste Perry. She is one of our own Bay Area activists, a Bay Area and radio TV veteran and host. And at this point, we are going to stop sharing slides and welcome Celeste and Heather. Hi, Celeste.
Hi, Susan, and hi, Heather. I can't even tell you. So excited. Welcome.
Well, I'm excited to be here. It's a great kickoff, isn't it?
I think so. I mean, we are, could you tell that we're really proud of all the work we do? And I mean, there was some great news there. I know there's a lot of bad news, a lot of dark clouds over it, but we've done, and many other groups across the country, we've just done really amazing things because we all work really hard.
Well, and the fun thing about it is that it is a historical moment where we are changing the course of American history. But so many people didn't really think that something like a state Supreme Court justice could really matter. But Janet Protasiewicz, man, it's going to make a huge difference because of the redistricting they're hearing right now.
I know.
So all these calls and everything really matter.
Wow, and I really am impressed at how well you say Janet Protasiewicz. We all worked so hard to sound like we were from Wisconsin when we made those calls, and it was terrific. You can only imagine how exciting that was for us because it was pretty scary.
Yes, yes.
Um,
And yet, it's like all these elections, each vote matters. And then you see something like that. And now that she is in that office and we have some sense of the way she's going to approach redistricting, which by the way is not a question of giving the Democrats an advantage. It's simply trying to hold back the extraordinary over advantage that the Republicans had gerrymandered themselves into. Once we look at the restoration of fairness, um you think of what could have happened in the other way and you think, you
right.
know what, maybe we really can do this.
I know. Well, it was, I guess it was called Operation Red Map, right? In
It was
2010. And everything
2010.
changed because of that. And
Yes,
we woke
it was.
up. In fact, yeah, I do kind of want to go back to what I want to say to you as a welcome. And that is, first of all, thank you. And I found an article, a profile of you. I think you had maybe been writing letters from an American for maybe 6 months. It was in 2020. It was in the New York Times. And you said, what I am doing is speaking to women who have not necessarily been paying attention to politics, older people who had not been engaged. So I'm one of those women who you were talking to. I woke up the morning after the elections in 2016 and got engaged, out of terror. Because
Wow.
yeah, and there are, first of all,
Oh,
I
I'm
want to say
sorry. You got engaged in
I
politics.
got engaged in
I
politics.
was
Yeah,
going to say,
no.
like, wow, that really was not a romantic moment. So I'm like,
Yeah.
okay.
No, we've been married for 35 years. He's in the
Yeah.
next room watching this Zoom. Anyway, I got engaged because I could feel the cruelty, which of course it's so much about cruelty with him. In any event, there are many women on this call and many women and men as well who have been engaged for a very long time, who have always been on the ground thinking about it. In fact, Susan Bole, who introduced us tonight, let's just say she was a model UN student from like when she was 13 years old. So this is something she's been doing forever. So she's one of our terrific leaders. In any event, thank you because we do look to you for context in these crazy times, and you're the history teacher that I certainly wish I had had, but you're teaching us every day, and we so appreciate it, and you really you make all the difference and you settle us down, and I can't thank you enough for that. And I also want you to know that we were, before you got here, over the days of planning, we were thinking, well, should we call her Professor Richardson or Dr. Richardson? And then I said, let's just call her Heather because you're like, one of those celebrated people now who you go by your first name. It's like everyone says, did you read Heather this morning? And we all know who we're talking about. So thank you.
Well, what I would say to that, first of all, is thank you. But second of all, I'm Heather because we really are a community. I mean, we're a small community. We just happen to span the entire United States and much of the globe. And one of the things we're doing is making this making the world smaller and more decent, and
Yes.
taking back our country to what it really could and should be. So in terms of me putting context in things, yes, that's what I've been trained to do. But really, I'm just having a conversation with everybody out there. And it's funny because I'm looking at the names coming through here, and you've been probably seeing me looking down. I'm texting people. I'm like, hey, I know you, and hey, I met you,
Oh,
wherever. And we're really a good community, I think.
Oh, that's so fantastic. You know, the person who wrote that New York Times profile, I was talking to Bill Moyers about you during the profile piece, and what he said was, I forget the name of the author of the article, but he said that he hadn't read much of Letters from an American, that he was kind of stuck on Twitter. And Bill Moyers said the most lovely thing about you, it was poetic. He said, you, to the author of the article, you live in a world of thunderstorms, and she watches the waves come in. And that is how it feels.
Yeah,
It
and
really does.
and Bill is such an absolutely wonderful man. I've gotten to know him over the years, and he's
Mm.
just a lovely, lovely man. So I will say one of the things that came out after that article was a lot of people got very unhappy that I had identified women as being crucial in this political moment, which was quite a surprise to me, by the way, to have people say, "Well, I'm a man, and I read you," and that's certainly true. I have a lot of both men and women who read me, but one of the things that really jumps out to me in this moment is that I believe that this is the first time in American history in which we have a very large population of women who expect to live, 20, 30 at least years after their kids leave the house. And they have education, and they have kinship networks, and they have friendship networks, and they have skills from whatever job they had outside the home. They're accustomed to travel. Sometimes they have money, and they're ready to take on the world. And the thing is, we don't really have any blueprint for how to do that. People have told us how to be, teenagers, and how to be young women, and how to have a profession, and how to be mothers, and maybe even how to be middle-aged. But this idea of how to continue to have an active, important life after we are, you know, birdless in our nests, but we have plenty of years left to work. I think it's a historical force that nobody has really grappled with yet, and we're writing it as we go along, and I find that extraordinarily exciting. And it's interesting to me because I also think a lot of people are not factoring it in when they're looking at 2024, and they're thinking about how the country might jump in the future. I actually said at one point to one of the podcasts, or one of the webcasts I do, in a way, we're the great invisible force here, because people don't sit there and say, what are older women going to do? We're kind of invisible. And in this case, being invisible can be extraordinarily powerful, because I think we're the numbers that are really going to matter going forward into 2024. It's a very exciting time to be operating in politics, and certainly to be doing what I do.
Hmm. This is fantastic, and I'm sure that we're gonna take those words with you and feel inspired by it all the time. And I will say that at this point in my life, I'm 65, that it is so wonderful to have a group of women and men too, who rally around deep values. I mean, there's something so profound about that. I mean, sure, it's love to get together and eat or have a hobby, but this value-based, saving the world, sort of reckoning that we're all experiencing together is quite powerful.
So I met somebody at an airport in the last few months, and I was having this discussion with her, and she said, "Oh, I knew exactly what I was going to do as soon as my kids left." And I knew she was probably in her 70s, at least, probably maybe early 80s. And she said, "I knew exactly what I was going to do. And that's exactly what I have done for the last 20 years and intend to keep doing. I'm going to be a good ancestor." And I thought, what a wonderful way to look at it. Like, we don't have a blueprint, so let's go ahead and be good ancestors, so that our great great grandchildren say, wow, my life is cool, but look what my great great grandmother did in 2024. I'm like,
Right.
there.
Yeah. There've been some great memes about that. It's like the picture of a little girl with her mother, and they're cooking, and she says, "Mommy, what did you do when this was all falling apart?" I was there resisting. So Heather, I love the book. I really do. It's a beautiful book too. Is
Yeah,
this
they
is
did a
this a
nice job.
sunrise, or
It's a
it's just,
sunrise. Yeah.
yeah,
It's supposed
it's
to be the
terrific.
sunrise rising outside. I live on the water, and it was
Mhm.
they couldn't get the colors right, and they couldn't get the cover right, and it was really bothering me. And finally my daughter said, who's not an artist, said, "Mom, what do you want?" And I said, "I want the sun rising over the islands." And
Mm.
she mocked something up, and I took it to them, and I said, "I don't want this, but I want that color gradation." And I think it really works.
It does really work. And by the way, I'm just going to throw it in real quick. We do appreciate when you take a little break from the letters and send us one of your beautiful pictures, either from you or from Buddy, of course, of Maine. And it's such an encouragement to step away for a minute and go outside if we're lucky enough to have a beautiful outside and enjoy that.
It's funny you say that because I realized I haven't taken a night off since January 7th, I don't think. And I might take it off tonight because really it's been a pretty quiet day.
Okay, sounds wonderful. So let's talk about the book. It's a book of three parts. There's the undermining of democracy. There's the authoritarian experiment, which to me, when I read it, it was like reminded me of if Black Mirror did an episode of The West Wing. It just was all those days coming back to me. And then finally, reclaiming America. And I would just like to read the first paragraph of chapter 21, which is the first page of Reclaiming America, because I believe that's what we're doing. Today's crisis in democracy has brought us back to the same question that haunted the founders. Are the principles on which this nation was founded viable? Is it really possible to create a country in which everyone is equal before the law and entitled to have a say in their government? Or are some people better than others and thus have the right and the duty to rule? Thinking of those villains right now. So there always seems, I mean, I think we all can feel the threat from within and we see it from without our country. But there seems always to be this tension between those who believe in self-determination, equality, struggling against those who want power over us. And obviously, it's not the first time that we've faced this in our country. What makes this moment different? I mean, I know you're not a prophet, but there's something going on here that's different. And I mean, I guess, you know, I've obviously never lived through a moment like this, but it feels pretty terrifying, frankly.
I know it feels terrifying. And I would say that every generation has faced its own terrors. But one of the things that any political scientist will tell you, and I'm not a political scientist, by the way, I'm a historian, but any political scientist will tell you that a right-wing reactionary movement will never get more than at most about 33% of the population. That's its base. That's the people. That's the high watermark of people who will sign on. Now, the way they take power is by convincing the majority that they are unstoppable, that they have more support than they do, by threatening them, by making themselves seem inevitable, by using a whole set of tools that you can see being deployed around us right now. But one of the great things we have in our toolkit right now that, for example, they didn't in the 1830s and 1930s and didn't in the 1850s in the United States was we know the playbook. We know how this is done. So we can sit there and you see people, for example, on Twitter, people like George Conway, whose big thing is like laugh at them, because laughing at them is a crucial thing to do. Other people like Timothy Schneider from Yale saying, don't obey in advance. You know, lots of people calling out different behaviors and saying, remember, this is not a majority. This is a minority, but don't be cowed into thinking they're a majority. Instead, get out there and make sure our voices are heard. So I think we have the advantage now in this very crucial moment in the United States of recognizing the tools that are being put to use. The one thing that and I mean I can talk about the past, but the one thing that I am very, I mean there's a couple of things I'm very concerned about right now, but one of them is disinformation. And you can already see the disinformation really ramping up. And one of the things that I would say to people as they get completely freaked out by one thing or another that they've read, and that is that the other tool that strong men use, and not just strong men in terms of politics, but anybody, a telemarketer or a scammer or anybody who's trying to get you to act with, you know, not act in your best interest, but to act in theirs, is they want you to react emotionally and quickly. So that anything that says to you, I have to do something right now, and I'm really angry about this right now, you should think maybe about whether this is disinformation and step back for at least a day, maybe 2 days. And when the story then unfolds, it's astonishing how often whatever the initial story was has completely fallen apart a couple days later. So going into this election, as you get riled up and you think, oh, I can't handle everything that's coming at me, it's okay to take a step back and say, wait a minute, let me see what's really happening here. I'll give it 48 hours.
That's a fantastic idea because we're almost trained at this moment to respond, and I have myself been caught in that. But we try very hard in our group to learn about those things and take those actions and just and resist to buy in. I mean, I'm thinking about Nikki Haley recently, who lives in South Carolina of all places, where there are lots of plantations to visit and understand about slavery, and the answer she gave on that news program where she was asked, about the causes of the Civil War. And I, when I was watching the anchor, I thought a lot of what like Conway said is not necessarily to laugh, but just to say, now come on. I would just wish that was the response more often. Now, come on. You know perfectly well that that's not true. And just rather than react, engage, and start fighting, because I think that's what they want, it to ramp up.
Well, we're actually in a really interesting moment politically right now in a different way as well. And that's something very important, I think, for people to recognize as they phone bank, as they talk to their friends, as they reach out about this election. And that is that the Republican Party is doubling down on extraordinarily unpopular policies. So, for example, in terms of reproductive health care, we know from a very recent poll within the last week or so, that 69% of Americans would like to see Roe reinstated. 69%, that's almost 70%. The number of Americans who want to make sure we don't have reproductive rights, about 12%. So one of the things that the Democrats are doing right now is simply to let people know that what they want is actually something that the Democrats are also on record for wanting, and these extremist Republicans are on record for wanting just the opposite. So the same thing with basic gun safety legislation, enormously popular, over 70% popularity. Taxes on the extremely wealthy, enormously popular. I mean, the infrastructure acts, those are so popular that the Republicans who voted against them are currently taking credit for them or trying to. So we're in this funny moment where we have an administration and the Democrats who are running for office actually way out in front with extraordinarily popular policies, while the Republicans are doubling down on things that appeal to their base because they know they've got to get that base out there, but the general population doesn't like it all. Now I'm watching tonight the numbers coming out of the New Hampshire primaries, and those don't tell us a lot about the general election, but they do tell us some things about the way people are thinking. So when I said not much happened tonight, I kind of mean that. We don't, you don't really have to know what happened in the news today, at least in the United States, because there wasn't anything hugely earth-shattering, maybe one thing, but not the primary. But what's interesting about the primary is the people who turn out for primaries or caucuses are the deepest committed people in those parties. And one of the things that they're learning in the exit polls from the Republicans who voted in the Republican primary in New Hampshire today is they don't want an abortion ban. Mm-hmm. Now, that's something that Donald Trump and Nikki Haley have both said that they are in favor of, and yet the primary voters, the ones who are the most dedicated Republican voters, are coming out of those booths and saying, no, we don't want that. And you look at that and you think, boy, I would much rather be arguing, I want the thing that 70% of Americans want, than saying, I want the thing that 12% of Americans want when I go into the general.
Right, right. Your letter on yesterday, actually, the 51st anniversary of Roe, well, it was terrific. And it was so, I would say, classic Heather, where you started and told us a story about the passage of the Kansas-Nebraska Act. I don't know if anyone's ever taken that and then superimposed it on the abortion issue and talked about it, but it was really fascinating. And I was wondering if for people who missed it, maybe you could talk about that a little bit, that how you chose to bring those two things together. I thought it was terrific.
Well, so the Kansas-Nebraska Act has always fascinated me because in the 1840s and the 1850s especially, gradually the elite Southern enslavers took over the Democratic Party And then they took over the national government. They took over the White House, they took over the Supreme Court, and they took over the Senate. Not in that order, by the way, but they had all those branches of government. But they didn't have the House of Representatives. And so as they were taking pieces of the government, most Northerners weren't paying any attention because they trusted democracy, they trusted the system. And yeah, the Democrats seemed to be winning a lot. And yeah, they started fighting with people in Congress, but really the system was going to hold, right? And then what happened was that in 1854, those elite Southern enslavers managed to force through the House of Representatives, and therefore it was going to go through the Senate and get signed by the president, a law that enabled human enslavement to spread into the American West, where it had been prohibited since 1820, since the Missouri Compromise, which was only a law, but everybody kind of felt like it was always going to be around forever. And when that happened, all of a sudden, all these Northerners who didn't agree with each other about finances or immigration or transportation or infrastructure, any of that stuff, looked at each other and they said, listen, we don't get along about any of these lower issues here. But if we let the Southern enslavers take over the American West, they're going to move slavery into it. And they're going to make slave states. And those slave states are going to work with the Southern slave states. And they're going to take over the entire House of Representatives and the Senate. And pretty soon, this whole country is going to be a slave country. And white, remember, because only property white guys can vote. And property white men are no longer going to be able to own property. They're not going to be able to go out west and work their way up. We will have destroyed American democracy. So this law, this Kansas-Nebraska Act, which, you know, a lot of people, especially Democrats, thought, people aren't going to care that much about it. Who cares about those Western areas out there? It's not going to matter. All of a sudden people woke up, and it wasn't so much that they cared about that particular act. They recognized that that act meant that they would lose American democracy. And the link that I made to the Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health decision of June 2022, in which this modern Supreme Court overturned the 1973 Roe versus Wade decision, which recognized the constitutional right to abortion, is that it's not that a lot of people necessarily care about abortion rights. Certainly, most of us do. But it's a larger picture, I think, of what this Supreme Court and the government, if it is run by these radical extremists, will do. So the same way in 1854, a number of people from New York, for example, would have been like, we don't care what happens in Kansas and Nebraska. But if the elite Southern enslavers can take over our government and take away our right to live in the American West, and next they're going to take away our right to use the mails, and then they're going to take away our right to petition our government, and then they're going to take away our right to read whatever we want, and then they're going to take away our right to vote, and then they're going to take away our right to be treated equally before the law, because it's not just Black Americans that they are looking at, but they're also looking at Irish Americans and Chinese Americans. That's when they look at the system, how it is being taken over by a very small group, by the way, of radical extremists, and they say, enough. And if you think about Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health, you know, the number of people I've heard say to me, and these would be men, saying, people are going to forget about it. It doesn't matter. You know, don't worry about it. It's not going to get bigger than this. Don't worry. It's all going to go away. And you look at the fact that Democrats have overperformed by about 8 points in every election since then that has had abortion on the ballot. I wonder if this is our Kansas-Nebraska moment where we say to each other, listen, we may not agree about finance, and we may not agree about immigration laws, and we may not agree about the CHIPS Act and all that, but by God, we can agree on the fact that we care about democracy. And if you have a Supreme Court and a group of radical extremists who can take away the recognition of an established constitutional right, what's next? I mean, they're talking about contraception. They're talking about gay rights. Some people have even made noises about interracial marriage, and certainly a gay marriage. Where does that stop? And if it doesn't stop with anything that has been defended under the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, which, by the way, is used every time is used after World War II to defend, for example, desegregation, where does that stop? and maybe that what we really need to do is protect democracy, and then we can hash the rest out later. And that's actually one of the things that I find really exciting about this moment, is when that happened in the 1850s and then into the 1860s and the 1870s, it was an enormously exciting time in which we changed our government. We changed who had a say in our government. Lots of new ideas, lots of new people, lots of changes, lots of excitement. And, and I feel like we're seeing the same thing now. So as frightening as this moment is, it is also a time of, I think, effervescence, if you will, where we get to rebuild our country in a better way than it was before.
Thank you for saying that. And you have really, I actually printed, I printed the letter because I think it's something I want to remember, that, Dobbs is our Kansas, Nebraska. It's a terrific argument. I really like it. And I think that we can hone that message and really, and talk to voters about it in that way. Because it's one thing just to scare people, but to say, well, look at this. And of course, that's what you do. So I want to talk about our president right now. I do. I saw an interview, not the last one you just did, but one maybe about a year ago in 2022. And you had a chance to sit down with Joe Biden, and you called him, you said to his face that was a transformational president, sort of in the lineage of Lincoln. I know you consider yourself a Lincoln Republican, Teddy Roosevelt and FDR. But that's not how you always felt. You weren't an early Biden supporter. So I would love you to talk about how your thinking about Joe Biden has changed and how it's evolved. I think you're a pretty big fan now.
I am a very big fan, but what's funny about it is that so I have now the opportunity to interview him twice, and I'm a historian, so like I know Biden's administration incredibly well because I read everything that comes out of them. The same way I know Grover Cleveland's administration really well, or I know Abraham Lincoln's administration very well. To me, they're chess pieces on paper, and to interview one of them and have him be able to talk back, I'm like, no, that's not what you think. And of course, he knows what he thinks. So it's this weird thing of like, you're not supposed to have an opinion about your own life, And actually, the one I just did with him a couple of weeks ago, I totally teed up. So this is the way it's supposed to be, right? And he's like, no, actually, it's not like that. It's something else. And I'm like, wait, you can't say that. I've studied you so deeply. Anyway, so I was not a Biden supporter at first because I thought he was going to be a caretaker. And I thought we needed somebody very dynamic. And I just thought he was going to say nice things and sit there, and then we would be stuck right where we had been for so long. And I am here to say, oh boy, was I wrong. Because I think he's been transformational both at home and in foreign policy. But let me say at home, what he has done is to roll back the Reagan Revolution, which began in 1981, in which the Republican Party embraced the idea that the way you move society forward was to concentrate wealth at the top. And there's an ideology behind this, by the way. I'm not defending it. I'm saying it's there, that if you concentrate money at the top, businessmen and businesswomen, but really they were focused primarily on men, businessmen would concentrate their wealth and they would use it far more efficiently than the government could. So they would invest in new businesses and new factories, and that would in turn hire individuals, hire people just starting out, and everybody would have jobs, and there would be much greater production, and there would therefore be a higher tax base, and the country would just boom and grow, and everybody's boats would rise together. It's called supply side economics, and the idea was that instead of making sure people at the bottom had money, you made sure people at the top had money so they could invest it more efficiently. But the problem with supply side economics was that it never worked. So what happened between 1981 and 2021 is that the middle class got absolutely hollowed out. Tons of money moved to the top of the economy, but it didn't end up getting invested in new businesses so much as it ended up getting invested in financial instruments that really didn't do much for people at the bottom. And we ended up with this actually a population that was ready to be picked up by a strong man like Donald Trump. So that system was the one that was in place after 1981. And Biden came in with many of his really wonderful appointments, including Lena Khan, for example, at Commerce, and many of the different people he had set in the financial and economic portions of his administration to roll that back. So rather than concentrating money at the top, what the Biden administration has done is it has tried to resurrect that older system that we had in place between 1933 and 1981, where the government really worked to level the economic playing field and to make sure that there was money in the demand side, to make sure that people had decent wages, and to make sure that we had manufacturing jobs and that things were brought back onshore, and that we invested in infrastructure. And we did all those things that worked so well in that earlier time. I was saying to someone the other day that, I kept saying this economy's good, this economy's good, this economy's good. And I kept reading and then, in major newspapers that the economy was terrible. And I finally thought, am I drinking the Kool-Aid here? Because the numbers I see look really good, but maybe I'm missing it and everybody else is looking at something different than I am. And then I kind of hit myself upside the head and said, wait a minute, no, we know this works because it worked from 1933 to 1981. And we know the other system doesn't work because it didn't work from 1981 to 2021. So he has managed really to grow our economy very quickly and we're the best economy in the world right now. And one of the things that you're going to hear people say is things were great under Trump. Well, that's just not true. In the 3 first years of Trump's administration, before the pandemic pushed everything off a cliff, economic growth was about 2.5%. In the third quarter of 2023, under the Biden administration, economic growth was 4.9%, which is a crazy high number. We have unemployment below 4%, which is what many people consider to be full employment, and has been for more than 2 years. Wages have increased faster than inflation, which of course has been coming down, so it's only slightly above 2% now. I mean, what he's done is he's returned us to a system that works by putting money back in people's hands. So and he's also, on the other hand, tried to break up monopolies, tried to do things like crack down on the people who are the very wealthy Americans who are cheating on the IRS. Janet Yellen has managed to negotiate a floor on taxes around the world, a global minimum tax. So they're really trying to recreate a fairer economic system. And then overseas, in terms of foreign policy, which again, I literally said to somebody, why do we need Joe Biden? I know he's great at foreign policy, but this next administration is going to be all about domestic stuff. Wrong, 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 wrong. Think about what the Biden administration did, first of all, to keep NATO together. Because, of course, Trump wants to get out of NATO, and he did his best to undermine NATO. And, of course, who wants NATO to disappear? Vladimir Putin wants NATO to disappear. And if you think about what would have happened in the global world, in the globe, if, I'm sorry, I'm always a little bit inarticulate this late at night on my coast. If Donald Trump had been in office in February 2022, when Vladimir Putin's troops rolled again over the border into Ukraine, and Biden and Blinken hadn't managed to keep NATO together and hadn't managed to have world sanctions on Russia, so that Ukraine, until very recently, was not only holding its own against Russia, it was rolling Russia back. It has regained 50% of the land that Russia took in that initial blitz. It has regained control of the Black Sea. It has, managed to keep grain flowing into Africa, which was a huge problem, because if Ukrainian grain didn't keep going into Africa, many countries in Africa were going to starve, and that would make them much more open to having what was at the time the Wagner Group coming in. Now, of course, is Russians coming in because the guy in charge of the Wagner Group was killed in the plane crash. But if Trump had been in office, he would have let Putin keep on rolling. That was actually part of the deal in 2016, which is sort of itself an interesting story. It's in the transcripts from the investigation into Russia working with Trump. And think about that. Right before Putin went into Ukraine, Putin and Xi Jinping of China had kind of a pinky swear that they were going to be besties forever. And if you think about what that would have meant right now, of course, the Chinese economy is in terrible straits. And essentially, Ukraine has become a client. I'm sorry, not Ukraine. Russia has become a client state of China because Russia is so hurting for money. And while certainly Russia is trying to expand and really supporting, somebody in Belarus, think of what would have happened if rather than all those people being weaker than they are right now, they were all much stronger. NATO had collapsed. We didn't have anybody that Biden has supported in the Indo-Pacific to push back against China. Certainly, the Pacific Islands wouldn't be involved in strengthening themselves. Imagining what that would look like in this moment, to me, all I can see is the United States on the ropes as people like Vladimir Putin expand their influence. So the fact that Biden has initiated this new vision of foreign policy, to enable countries not to become our besties, but rather to have sort of a seat at the table in all these regions so that they can expand the kinds of governments that are representative of the people without necessarily being democracies, seems to me to be the wave of the future. And that's one thing that I'll really be focusing on in 2024 is I've been doing a really deep dive in foreign policy. And I think what they're doing is truly astonishing. And most people don't even know it's happening because it's not getting much coverage.
Huh. Okay. Well, we'll be looking forward to that. I know that in your interview with President Biden um, a couple of years ago, he talked about talking with Xi Jinping, and it was off the record, but they were having a little conversation. And Xi Jinping said to him, that democracy requires consensus. It's just too slow in these fast times, and really, authoritarianism is so much better. So, I mean, we know he feels that way, but you're so absolutely right that we would have been on the ropes, certainly.
Well, do remember that one of the reasons that the Republican leaders now, CPAC, for example, and now Donald Trump himself, the Heritage Foundation, those leaders, I just keep saying this is not your mother's Republican Party. These are extremists who have taken over what was once a grand party and have run it into, off the cliff, if you will. But they are all championing Viktor Orban of Hungary, who has deliberately destroyed democracy in his own country and has done so with an argument that is very attractive to certain people in Russia and certainly people in the United States who belong to that extremist group, because what they argue is that the equal rights that are the foundation of democracy, the idea that we should be equal before the law and have a right to a say in our government, things that are promised to us in the Declaration of Independence, that those things, by making LGBTQ plus people, women, people of color, Black Americans equal to white men, thereby are ruining the patriarchy and the religious systems that they insist are imperative to have a virtuous society. So Viktor Orban has called for a Christian democracy, as he calls it, which is not the same thing as the German political party, or illiberal democracy, which completely destroys the concept of democracy. And the fact that we have people in the United States who claim that they're going to make America great by emulating a small Central European dictatorship, I find mind-boggling.
It's
But
mind-boggling.
it's important to remember
Oh,
that's
sorry.
what they're up to.
Well, there was a fascinating and frightening profile in the New York Times on Sunday of I can't remember his name, but he's the new head of the Heritage Foundation, and of course he is just the biggest fanboy of Viktor Orban, and Joe. He harkens back to Joe McCarthy, who he thinks had some things right, and he said that their plan, it's a 1,000-page document, I believe, is to institutionalize Trumpism.
Yes.
It's quite terrifying actually. So.
So to go back to where we are here tonight, this is one of the things that it seems to me that is both easy, because what people like me want is not some crazy, thing I'm trying to persuade people of. What I'm trying to persuade people of is that those of us who want to protect American democracy are a majority. We're reasonable people. We're decent people. We are very deeply tied into our American history, into the Declaration of Independence, into Abraham Lincoln, into FDR, into Eisenhower, into Theodore Roosevelt, into the people that we honor, into Fannie Lou Hamer, into Red Cloud, into the people who have defended individuals' rights to determine their own destiny. And that's a pretty easy sell in the United States. I will also say for people who are trying to get excited about going out and maybe feeling a little bit uncomfortable about phone banking or talking to their neighbors or making sure people are registered to vote or working as elections officials, is that this really is our moment to step forward. And, we're not planting victory gardens or perhaps, marching in the street or not standing up on a bus, but this is our moment to defend American democracy. And that's an exciting group of people to be part of. Wouldn't you rather hang your hat with W.B. Du Bois or Abraham Lincoln than with the neo-Nazis? It's not a hard choice.
It's very sweet of you to spend so much time with us. And I have just one final question, kind of along those lines. I know that you're someone who thinks about, truth and the way language is used and how it changes people's perceptions and has such a huge impact and on history and seems like truth is really up for grabs. And to watch the Republican Party talk about and try to shift our reality. I'm thinking about Kellyanne Conway's moment of, dominance over all truth by calling them alternative truths, which made for lots of funny memes, but was really quite a chilling statement. And so I think that we've had, we've been a little concerned about the way the press has covered Trump, and there are some people who are really trying to push for a more pro-democracy press. And I'm not talking about democracy in the party of Democrats, but the Atlantic magazine is really doing a great job of it. Margaret Sullivan is really pushing for it. Jennifer Rubin talks about it a lot. So I'm sure that clearly you consume a lot of news and information. And so who are the trusted journalists, the trusted places to go for information besides you, of course?
Well, so I'm going to throw Jay Rosen into the group that you just listed there, because he's the man who coined the phrase "the odds, the stakes, not the odds," as in tell us what's at stake in this election, not who's going to win the election. And that's something that you see everybody quoting a lot. Okay. So I'm going to take that in a slightly different direction. You've mentioned a lot of people that I trust. I read very, very widely, and it's hard for me to say you should go to this one place, because generally there's some great people at each major outlet, and then others where I sit there and think, really? It's worth remembering that people who write columns do not write their headlines, which is a huge source of frustration to those of us who write. So whatever the headline is, remember that you're clicking gives them money. So they write stuff that is outrageous. Every paper does that. And you're like, that's not what I wrote. And they're like, never mind, it's what's going to stay. But I'd like to say something else, and that is that there is a problem because of the monetization of the way clicks happen and all that. There is a problem with our media, whether or not you agree with the newspapers. And I would like to suggest something else in this moment when voices are so very, very important. And that is, I think all of us should think about the 1890s. And especially the summer of 1890. And the reason for that is that in that summer, it looked very much like the Republican Party at the time was going to sweep the midterm elections. And the two parties were both very entrenched. The Democrats were trying hard to push back against what were then called the robber barons, the industrialists like Andrew Carnegie, for example. But they really weren't getting a lot of traction. They were focused mostly in New York and in Pennsylvania and places like that. But what happened in the summer of 1890 fascinates me because many people did not see it happening. That is, in the plain states and to some degree in the American South, farmers and workers started to get together, and they started to have meetings, and they were meetings in which people said, hey, do you understand how tariffs work? And do you understand how the kickbacks for railroads work? And do you understand how monopolies work? And they started to have meetings that were factual meetings, just explaining the world. They weren't necessarily saying, we hate Andrew Carnegie. They were saying, do you understand how this works? And they started to have picnics, and gradually they started to say, hey, this is not okay. And a woman named Mary Elizabeth Lease became very famous in that summer because she told people, farmers, that they needed to start growing. They needed to start growing a lot less corn and a lot more how. They increasingly started to spread their message themselves through meetings, through picnics, through newspapers. And they were newspapers that nobody back east were paying any attention to. They were ephemeral. Many of them don't exist any longer. But what happened was in the election of 1890, back east, the Republicans and the Democrats both thought the Republicans are going to clean up. They're going to have both houses, a House and Senate, and, they've got the White House, and this is kind of a nothing election, right? But what happened in that election was there was this grassroots movement. That's why they call it a grassroots movement, because the grass in the plains grows down like 21 feet. And nobody saw it happening. And when the election results were calculated, the Republicans had lost the House of Representatives by a margin of 2-1, and they had lost control of the Senate. And back east, everyone's like, what just happened here? And there's this wonderful letter. This woman went to visit the president, Benjamin Harrison, and he's wandering around going, I don't know what happened. I don't know what happened. I don't know what happened. All I know is it wasn't my fault. But this moment when we're worried about the press, one of the things that I would say is, one of the ways that the Republican Party radicalized into this extremist movement that is trying to destroy American democracy was by using social media. We can do the same thing. We can use that same tool the other way. So one of the things that I've been encouraging people to do in this moment is, sure, read the newspapers, and people get mad at what different papers are doing, but then you can tell the truth. You can tell it to your friends, and you can say, hey, no, in fact, Biden did not take money from China. Somebody did. Oh, I know. That was Donald Trump. He's admitted it on video. And using the power of the media that we now have at our fingertips to say, stop complaining about whichever newspaper is upsetting you and set the record right yourself. In 1890, that changed the entire course of American history, because once that happened, both major parties recognized that they couldn't continue to do business as usual. They both became reform parties. That was 1890. And by 1912, there were 4 major people running for president that year, and every single one of them was a progressive. So within about 20 years, that the principles of that alliance movement that becomes the populist movement had become part of all the major parties, and they had managed to change the future of American history. So rather than worry about who you should read, I think you should start writing.
I love that you say that. And I had actually, highlighted that spot about the 1890s. I said, that kind of sounds like us, because we are grassroots. We're doing phone banking, canvassing, and we also do relational campaigning. We have our groups of families, and we talk to and friends and reach out. So you're so right, and that's a wonderful way. I think we're wrapping up now. I mean, we could stay and talk for hours, but I know it's late for you, Heather, and I would say that we won't keep you this long next time, but we certainly would love to have you come back, maybe in October when things are really heating up, and just give us a little boost. I mean, it's been lovely talking to you. Obviously, we're huge fans.
I have to say, history is great and all that, but the people who are on this call, you're the ones who are changing the future. And you're the ones who are speaking for American democracy. And you're the ones who are carrying the torch for all those people who gave up their lives in the past to make this country survive. And for all that it seems stupid to be, I don't know, stuffing an envelope or writing a list, that's doing the work, and that's carrying the ball forward. And I find it incredibly inspiring. And I'm so proud to be a part of this movement and to be with people like you. So, carry it forward, and yeah, let's do it. This is our time.
Thank you, Heather. We're all going to read you tomorrow.
Thank you for having me. I think
day.
It's going to be a photograph. But
we love that. We love that. So have a beautiful rest of your night, and we'll see you again.
Let's all give Heather a big round of applause too, Celeste. Heather and Celeste, thank you so much. That was so powerful. Please, let's all join in and give them both a big round of applause. And also in chat, please go buy Heather's new book and subscribe to her Substack. The links are in chat right now. That
Thank
was
you,
amazing.
Heather.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Heather. Wow.
Wow. I think it worked.
I'm speechless. That was so
I was tearing
powerful.
up, you know, anyway, when she was
She,
talking about what we all do here and all of you do. I mean, even if some of you are on this call and say, oh, I've never done a phone bank or I haven't done it yet, but you showed up tonight and that's, you know, that means a lot. And
Celeste,
she
you
hadn't
really
inspired
showed
you.
up tonight. You
Oh,
you were incredible. What an
oh,
incredible
thanks.
interview. The questions you asked were the ones we all wanted to hear the answers to. Thank you so much for all the
Thank
work you did.
you.
You did so much work to make this happen. And I'll right now, I'll thank you and a certain man named Alan Kripak who helped us get Heather in this room. So both Celeste and her husband, thank you very much to them. And thank you all for being here tonight. I think, Celeste, do you have anything else you want to?
I don't, but I also want to just say to you really quickly that when that morning in November of 2016, when I woke up terrified, I called a woman, she might be on this call, Susan Pfeiffer, another great organizer in San Francisco, and I worked with her in radio many years ago. And I said, you know, between tears, who am I gonna, who's gonna help? Who can I work with? Who's actually gonna? And I don't want to just feel good. I want to do something. And she said, if you can find Susan Bole. And so it's been that long. So thank you, Susan, for all the work you do
Thank
and for
you.
being a great leader.
Thank you. And you know, that was the day you got engaged. So Alan will be surprised to hear
Believe
that.
it's very funny. Heather's funny. She's good. All
She
right.
was.
You can move me out of the spotlight. Thank
Okay,
you
thanks a
for
lot. And
stuff.
and
Thank
right
you.
now we're just going to show a couple last slides because I really want everyone to feel this as a moment to take action. So Leanne, can you just show the take? Yeah, there you go. So this, again, this is the Bay Area Coalition. We are all about taking action. We will not leave our country, our children, our grandchildren, and the most vulnerable people in our country in the hands of the cruel MAGA cult and the Heritage Foundation and Project 25. We are going to fight like hell to make sure that does not happen. So again, you heard before about what we do. We're focusing on the swing states. We are working with the DNC. We have phone banks canvassing for all of you in the West Coast, in California in particular. We're working right now. Tomorrow, we have a phone bank to the New York Congressional District 3 voters so that we will elect a Democrat and get a leg up in the House so that we can take back the House. And obviously, our ultimate goal is to have a trifecta, the House, the Senate, and the presidency. And we can do that. You just heard Heather. It is not beyond that. That is not beyond us. We are in that right now. 70% of people support our policies on reproductive health and on gun control. That is what we want to do right now, is to capitalize on that. So please jump in and take action with your home groups, all the groups around the country. Swing Left National, a great place for you to get started if you want to do work in person. But we're also a great place for you to get started because we have virtual phone banks every Wednesday and we have one tomorrow. So please sign up for that. And also for our speaker series, I mentioned Anderson Clayton, the North Carolina Democratic Party chair, coming on February 12th. Again, that is in that link tree that you see right now in chat and on the screen. And also you'll see in Linktree the links to buy Heather's book, Democracy Awakening, her latest book, and also subscribe to her Substack, because I promise you, you will sleep better, you will feel clearer, and you will feel more, you will be ready to take action. Just remember this one thing: 1 in 3 women of reproductive age now live under an abortion ban because conservatives on the Supreme Court struck down Roe v. Wade in 2022. Yesterday was the anniversary of that terrible moment. Please take action. Do not leave this meeting without clicking on this QR code and getting involved. Even if it's not with us, we are very happy for you to get involved with any of our national partners, Swing Left, and all the groups that are on the call tonight. So again, thank you very much. We'll just remove all the slides now and say goodbye to you and take me off spotlight so we can see each other. And this is our community. Thank you for coming tonight. Thank you for being respectful. And thank you, most of all, Heather. That was incredible. Thank you so much.